Level 1. The Recruit. You raise your right hand on a Monday morning in July. The Police Academy Auditorium holds 600 people and every seat is full. Families in the balcony, commissioners on the stage, the city seal on the wall behind the podium. You are 22 years old and you are one of 312 recruits standing in rows on the floor. And when the oath comes, you say every word like you mean it, because you do. You grew up in this city, Queens. Specific block, specific neighborhood, specific set of sounds and smells and faces that belong to you the way a place only belongs to someone who came from it. You watched cops work your neighborhood your whole childhood. Some of them were good, some of them weren't. You wanted to be the kind that was. That's the whole reason. No complicated origin story, no single dramatic moment, just a kid who grew up watching and decided he could do it better, and now here he is in a room with 311 other people who each have their own version of that story. The academy is 6 months. You run, you lift, you study law, constitutional procedure, use of force policy, de-escalation, report writing, firearms qualification, first aid. You sit in classrooms and you listen to instructors who have done everything they're teaching, and you take notes on everything, and you ask questions when something doesn't make sense, and you stay late when the material isn't clicking. You make friends in your cohort, real ones, the kind that form when people go through hard things together in close quarters. A woman from the Bronx named Teresa who runs faster than anyone in the class. A former teacher from Staten Island named Dominic who writes the best reports anyone has seen. A kid from Brooklyn named Jalen who jokes his way through every stressful moment and is always serious exactly when it counts. You graduate on a Friday in December. Snow on the steps outside, your mother in the front row, your badge pinned to your chest by a captain who doesn't know your name and doesn't need to. The badge doesn't care who pins it. What matters is that it's on your chest and it's yours, and the city just handed you something that comes with a weight you're only beginning to understand. You get your assignment, the 75th Precinct, East New York, Brooklyn. You look it up when you get home. Crime statistics, neighborhood history, call volume. You read everything. You fall asleep with your new uniform laid out on the chair by your bed like a kid the night before the first day of school. You wake up before your alarm. Level 2. The Rookie. Your first partner is a 14-year veteran named Frank Suarez. Frank is 41 years old and has the specific energy of someone who has seen enough that nothing surprises him, but hasn't yet seen so much that nothing matters to him. He is not warm on your first day. He is not cold. He is precise. He tells you 3 things in the car before your first tour starts, and he says them once and he does not repeat them. He says, keep your head on a swivel. He says, write everything down. He says, when something feels wrong, it is wrong. You spend the first 6 months watching Frank more than you watch anything else. You watch how he talks to people, how he approaches a scene, how he reads a block the way some people read a book, absorbing information before he opens his mouth, making the assessment before he makes the contact. You watch how he handles the moments that could go sideways, and the ones that actually do, and the ones that look like they will and then don't. You respond to a domestic call on your 3rd week. Apartment 4C, 5th floor of a walk-up in Cypress Hills. You can hear the argument before you reach the landing. Frank knocks. The door opens. A man, his wife visible in the background. The apartment's small and hot and charged with something that's been building longer than tonight. Frank talks. You watch how he talks, the register of his voice, the pace of it, the specific way he takes up space in the doorway that is neither threatening nor retreating, the way he finds the thing the man needs to say and lets him say it. 20 minutes later, you're back in the car, and nobody went to jail, and nobody went to the hospital, and Frank is writing the report, and you were thinking about voice register and body position, and the way a door can be both an entrance and a de-escalation tool. The calls come in every tour. Noise complaints, car accidents, assaults, robberies, overdoses, mental health calls, domestic disputes, stolen property, a fire, a found child, a man on a roof. All of it cycling through your radio every shift with the relentless democratic urgency of a city that never stops needing something. You make your first arrest on a Tuesday night. A robbery suspect 2 blocks from the precinct. Young guy, 19. He runs, and you chase him 4 blocks, and you take him down on the sidewalk, and you cuff him, and you read him his rights, and your heart is going so fast you can feel it in your teeth. Frank says, "Good chase." That's it. Good chase. You write it in your notebook when you get home. Level 3. The Street Cop. 3 years in, and you know your precinct the way you know your own apartment. You know which blocks go quiet at the wrong time and which ones are supposed to be loud. You know the corner stores and which ones are fronts and which ones are just corner stores. You know the names of the regulars, the ones who call you by your last name and the ones who won't look at you and the ones who look at you because looking away would mean something they don't want it to mean. You know Mrs. Patterson in 3B on Sutter, who calls every Tuesday about a noise complaint that is never actually a noise complaint. It's loneliness. She lives alone, and Tuesday is when her daughter doesn't call and the walls get loud. You figured this out over 11 separate Tuesday visits. You don't write it anywhere, you just know. The job has a rhythm now that it didn't have before. Not routine exactly. The calls never get routine because routine implies predictability, and the streets don't do that. But a rhythm, the way a musician knows a song, not what's coming next, but how to respond to what comes, how to move through the structure without losing the thread. You have opinions now about how the precinct runs, about which policies make sense on the street and which ones were written by someone who has never worked the street, about the difference between clearing a call and actually resolving it, about the gap between what the paperwork says happened and what actually happened. You keep most of these opinions to yourself. You say some of them to Jalen, who is in a different precinct now, but who you still have lunch with every other Thursday. Jalen has the same opinions and says them louder than you do, and you tell him to be careful and he tells you you worry too much, and you're both probably right. You get a commendation, a missing child case. 7 years old, wandered from his mother in the BJ's parking lot on Conduit. You were first on scene. You organized the search pattern. You found him 40 minutes later in the garden section pressed behind a display of ceramic pots, scared and unhurt, and holding a plastic watering can he apparently decided he needed. The commendation goes on your wall. You look at it sometimes when you're getting ready for a shift, and you think about the 40 minutes. You think about the mother's face when you walked out with him. You think about things like that more than you think about the commendation itself. Level 4. The Detective. You make detective on your 6th year. The Gold Shield. You move to the Detective Bureau. Homicide. Not because you requested it specifically, but because your clearance rate on cases as a patrol officer caught the attention of a lieutenant who put your name on a list, and when the opening came, your name was still on it. The work is different. Patrol is immediate. Something happens and you respond. The timeline is the length of a tour. Detective work is long. Cases that span months. Evidence that doesn't announce itself. Witnesses who don't want to be witnesses. Families who need you to tell them something and you don't always have something to tell them. Your first homicide case is a 19-year-old named Marcus Webb. Found in the early morning hours on a street in East New York, 3 blocks from the school he graduated from 6 months ago. Single gunshot wound, no witnesses. Or rather, no one who will say what they saw. You work the case for 4 months. Canvassing, security cameras, phone records, a confidential source who gives you something that gives you something else. The slow accretion of evidence that doesn't make a case by itself, but builds toward one. You are patient in a way that 3 years of patrol work prepared you for. You know how to wait on a street corner. You know how to wait in an interview room. The arrest happens on a Thursday. Not the triumphant television version. A man at a kitchen table in Brownsville, his mother in the next room. You present the warrant, and he looks at the table, and you read him his rights, and his mother starts crying in the other room, and you do the job. You think about Marcus Webb. Not every day, but often enough. You think about the school he graduated from, the 6 months between graduation and that street, the specific sliver of time that held all the decisions that led from one to the other. The Gold Shield doesn't give you answers. It just gets you closer to the questions. Level 5. The Sergeant. You pass the sergeant's exam on your 10th year. The promotion is different from making detective. Detective was a recognition of what you could do. Sergeant is a recognition of what you might be able to make other people do. The distinction matters. You are no longer primarily a person who does the work. You are a person who is responsible for people who do the work. The whole meaning of accountability shifts. You supervise a patrol squad in the 79th Precinct in Bedford-Stuyvesant. 8 officers, various experience levels from 18 months to 9 years. You know who the good ones are and who needs work and who has potential they haven't unlocked yet and who has been doing this long enough that the job has started to wear a particular groove in them that's going to be hard to get out of. You ride with your officers rather than supervising from the precinct. This is a choice. Some sergeants run their squads from behind a desk. You made a different calculation early. You want to know what your officers are facing on the street, and you want your officers to know that you know. This produces a specific kind of credibility that cannot be generated from a desk. You handle a use of force incident in your second year in the role. One of your officers, a foot chase that ended with a takedown that produced an injury the subject is now claiming was excessive. You investigate it the way you investigate everything, completely. You look at the footage, you interview the officer, you interview the witnesses, you read the medical report. The findings are not clean. The force was within policy, but within policy is not the same as ideal. You write your assessment honestly. You sit down with your officer and you have the conversation that nobody enjoys having and that is nonetheless necessary. You tell him what the footage shows. You tell him what it means. You tell him what you need from him going forward. He doesn't like it. You don't need him to like it. You need him to be better. That's the job now. Not making arrests, making the people who make arrests better at making arrests correctly. Level 6, the lieutenant. 15 years in and you run a patrol bureau platoon. The paperwork is real. Nobody tells you when you're running toward a suspect at 22 how much of this job is documentation at 40. Reports, assessments, budget justifications, personnel evaluations, disciplinary records, overtime approvals, community board presentations, meetings with city council liaisons who have opinions about policing, and sometimes those opinions are right and sometimes they're not, and your job is to navigate both with equal patience. You do community meetings now. Church basements, school gymnasiums, community board conference rooms. You sit at folding tables across from people who are angry and afraid and people who want answers and people who don't trust you enough to believe answers even when you have them. You listen more than you talk. You've learned that listening is not the passive thing people think it is. It is work. It requires you to stay present when the content is uncomfortable and to find the legitimate thing inside the anger and to respond to that thing rather than to the temperature of the room. There is a shooting. One of your officers. The details are complicated in the way that everything is complicated at this level. Not complicated as in unclear. Complicated as in there are 12 layers of context for every 5 seconds of footage, and the footage is the only thing most people are going to see. You are in the precinct when it happens. You go to the scene. You get briefed. You brief the captain. You draft the initial incident report. You field calls from the borough commander and from the department's public information office and from a city council member's staff and from a reporter who got your number from somewhere, and you handled each of these in sequence without losing the thread between them. At midnight, you sit in your car in the precinct lot. 15 years. You've been doing this 15 years, and the weight of it tonight is different from the weight of any other night in a way you couldn't have predicted. You call your wife. She picks up on the first ring because she always picks up on the first ring after 15 years of knowing what the first ring might mean. You tell her you're okay. You mean it. You also mean something more complicated than it. Level 7. The captain. You command a precinct, the 81st, Crown Heights, Brooklyn. This is the thing you worked toward for 20 years, and now that you're in the chair, it feels less like a rival than responsibility. The precinct is not yours in the way a possession is yours. It is yours in the way that a patient is a surgeon's, not owned but entrusted, and the distinction carries everything. You have 250 people under your command. Patrol officers, detectives, supervisors, administrative staff, each of them with their own relationship to the job and the neighborhood and the badge. You learn quickly that commanding 250 people is not 250 separate tasks. It is one continuous task of setting the conditions in which 250 people make good decisions when no one is watching. The neighborhood is your partner. You understand this in a way that not every commanding officer does. Crown Heights has a history with the police department that predates you by decades. You cannot walk into that history and expect it to step aside because you have good intentions. What you can do is show up, consistently, in person, at the community board, at the churches, at the school meetings, at the small business association dinners where the food is good and the conversations are real and the relationships built over rice and chicken are the ones that produce a call you actually need 3 months later. A crisis comes. It always comes. This one is a use of force incident that produces 3 days of protests outside the precinct. Not violent protests, people with signs and voices, and a genuine grievance that deserves to be heard rather than managed. You walk outside, not because protocol requires it, because it's right. You stand on the precinct steps and you listen. You don't make promises you can't keep. You don't defend what shouldn't be defended. You say what you know and acknowledge what you don't, and you tell them you are going to find out the rest, and you mean it. It doesn't resolve the crisis in a day. Nothing resolves a crisis like this in a day, but it changes the temperature, and changed temperature gives everyone more room to operate in, and room is what you need to do the work of actually figuring out what happened and what it means and what should change. You go to home at 11 p.m. Your kids are asleep. You look in on them the way you have every night for 12 years that you were home for. Quietly, briefly. The specific check of a parent who knows that showing up at night is also a form of showing up. You go to bed. Your alarm is set for 5:30. Level 8. The Chief. You are 53 years old and you are a Chief of Department, the second highest uniformed rank in the New York City Police Department. 31 years on the job. You have worked in 7 precincts across 4 boroughs. You have made arrests and supervised arrests and investigated arrests and approved arrests and reformed how arrests are made and documented and reviewed. You have buried colleagues. You have spoken at funerals. You have given eulogies and you have sat in the front pew receiving them. You manage 36,000 people. Not personally, through a structure of commanding officers and inspectors and deputy chiefs that you built and maintain and correct and adjust the way an engineer maintains infrastructure, not by touching every pipe, but by understanding the system well enough to know where the pressure is and where it isn't, and what happens when those two things reverse. The politics at this level are real in a way that nothing below this level prepared you for. The police commissioner reports to the mayor, you report to the commissioner. The mayor has political considerations. The commissioner has operational ones. Your job lives in the space between those two things, and that space is not always comfortable, and sometimes it is not even principled. And part of your job for the last 6 years has been deciding which compromises are acceptable and which are not, and being willing to say so clearly when they aren't. You've said so twice. Both times it cost you something. Both times you do it again. You walk the city sometimes, not officially, not with an escort, just walking, a 53-year-old man in plain clothes moving through neighborhoods he has spent 31 years serving. Nobody knows who you are. Nobody recognizes the chief of department in the man who stops to buy coffee at a cart on Atlantic Avenue, or who stands on a subway platform waiting for the A train in the morning. You prefer it this way. You remember what the city looked like at street level, and you don't want to forget it, because everything you do from the 32nd floor of one police plaza is in service of what happens at street level, and the distance between those two things is the most dangerous distance in policing. You think about Frank Suarez sometimes. He retired 6 years ago. You went to his retirement party in a Knights of Columbus Hall in the Bronx. Bad food, good speeches, Frank standing at the front of the room looking slightly embarrassed by the attention in the way of people who spent their careers doing things rather than being seen doing them. You think about Teresa and Jalen and Dominic, where the job took each of them, the different shapes a career makes depending on where you start it and what finds you and what you find and what you're willing to do when the two things don't match. You think about Mrs. Patterson in 3B. You hope someone figured out it was Tuesday. And somewhere in the Police Academy auditorium right now, a room full of recruits is raising their right hands. They are 22 years old. They grew up in this city. They have their reasons. The reasons are real. The job is real. The city is real and enormous and indifferent to their readiness, and will begin testing that readiness on Monday morning before the week is out. You know what's coming for them. You know which parts of it you can prepare them for and which ones only the street can teach. You know which ones will make it and which ones won't. And the honest answer is, you don't know yet, because you can't know yet, because the job doesn't reveal itself in the auditorium. It reveals itself on the street. In the car with Frank, on the landing outside apartment 4C, in the garden section of the BJ's with a scared 7-year-old holding a plastic watering can. In all the places nobody warned you about and you showed up for anyway. That's the job. That's always been the job.